Also, action.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. It's so lovely to see all of your faces, I have to say, and to be in an actual physical space doing a reading like this, celebration like this. Can't quite hear in the back. Is that a little better? Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Tony, is that that's better? Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Rick Hillis, and I'm here with my friend Peter Hooten. It's a special pleasure to be here with Peter. Peter was James Merrill's last partner. As Peter has told me, James Merrill was the love of his life. And so we are doing this celebration in that spirit of love, of celebration. And so much to say, so much to say. But we're going to start with a few poems.
Happy birthday song for James.
Well, okay, let's do that.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dearest James. Happy birthday to you.
Oh, Pisces! Yay!
And he wrote a great deal about what's underwater, which you'll hear about.
Okay.
We thought we would start with a poem that, how to say this, a poem written during a Cold War and in a time of, I don't know that we've even named the situation we're in now, but thinking of our brothers and sisters in Ukraine, I'd like to read this poem called Popular Demand. These few deep strongholds, each with generator, provisions, dossiers, it would seem the worst has happened. Who knows how? Essential data lost in the bright chromosome gargling dust burst. You, comrade, will indefinitely be resident of this one, with your disciplined women and staff. You and yours of this one, Mr. President. Grim huddles, then a first uncertain laugh. Spirits reviving, as life's bound to do, one hopes. Not from dead land, waste water, sulfur sky. Nowhere is anything both alive and blue except inside your blockheads, the mind's eye. Marveling up out of our common grave. Never thought, sincerely didn't think, who gave it clearance? It ransacks the cave for you with cordial venom. Damn you, drink.
This is casual wear on the same theme. Your average tourist, 50, 2.3 times merry. Dressed this year in fairly Flintbower originals. Odds 1 to 9/10. Again, odds 1 to 9/10 against her strolling past the embassy today at noon. Your average tourist, 25. Your average terrorist, 25. Celibate, no use for trends, at least for clothing. Mark, though, where it ends. Come forth made of colored mist and smiling on 100 million screens to tell in his prompt phone call to this nation. Claiming responsibility. Devastation signed with a flourish, like the dead wife's beams. Hi there. Would you like to join us? Thank you.
And Peter will continue with this poem, Developers at Crystal River.
James's parents were from Florida. Green Cove Springs, Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, and his grandparents. And so we felt, I'm originally from Florida. So we shared a lot in common, especially the springs, which you hear about, called Developers at Crystal River. Gorgeous springs, Crystal River, you don't know, they're boat 5 miles out, still see the bottom of the Gulf. Elysian glade, broilings, upsetterings of tinsel, mirror sycamores and wind. No, we are underwater. These are the springs. From deep below the bottom of white sand, mercurial baubles effervesce to aerate a glassed-in bower of bliss. They keep it 74 degrees. The mother manatees, brought here as babies, bring their babies here to see the year-round decorations and revel in each tree's renewing fruitlessness. Muses of sheer indolence they are, and foes to nothing in creation. Least of all, those luscious, undulating lawns downstream, plowing through which a sudden tenor scream, the power launch veers on guard, paths wide and blue, then redden. The huge, myopic cows go unheard, or finally wrinkled humps, over and over scarred by propellers, gaffs, and garden tools the boatmen use on them for fun. Each year are fewer. Sweet heaven, here comes one. No heavier than a sigh or small dirigible gone limp, or adipose naiad walking through murk on knives. Unmarriageable, unless the Prince of Wales. In her backwater court, she'll have escaped our human hells. Look how the blades have cut even into her. Intuiting the visitor, she drifts closer, flippers held out, deprecative but lonely. Makes a salute, her long lost cousin, with his flippers, his camera and visor. Time stops and offers what he'll only back on earth find words for. A brutal, chaste, unshaven kiss. He wrote that shortly after Elizabeth Bishop's death. And she had been working on a poem of her favorite animal, the manatee. So he likes to think maybe he finished it for her. It has so much of her in it. And she knew Florida very well. She wrote a poem about Florida, the state with the prettiest name, but a more picture postcard of itself. So here we go, Florida Miles, here we are. Heading more into the interior, which is the primacy of James, work the interior from room to room. I would like to read between us, if I can find it. Oh, here, I got it. Thank you, sir. There we go. Between us, a face. There it lies on the pillow, by your turned head's tangled graying hair. Another, like a shrunken head too small. My eyes in dread shut, open. It is there, waxen and human, small. The taut crease of the mouth shifts. It seems to smile, chin up in the wan light. Elsewhere I have known what it was, this thing, known the blind eye slit and knuckle sharp cheekbone. Ah, and again do, not a face, a hand seen queerly, mine. Deliver me, I breathe, watching it unclenched with a soft moan, and reach for you.
What's that one called?
Between us. It sort of, with his friend David Jackson, worked on the Ouija Board. It becomes sort of a parlor game, but if you'll hear about it later, it became such that after decades, he transcribed this busy, quick hand, called himself the Hand, and he called David Jackson the Hand. So this between us, the Hand, is what he sort of became. He felt, had to say, in touch with the spirits with Ouija. And James called himself the Scribe, because he just jotted everything down as it happened. And I've seen these manuscripts, they're just a jumble. I mean, it's just really quick shorthand. And he later went through and made sense of it. Astounding. Which you'll hear some about tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter, for all of that. You can see why I asked Peter to do this, right? Because he is such a font of information. And so often I'll get the chance to ask him questions like this, and I look around and I'm the only one listening. So this is an occasion for us all to benefit from all that Peter knows about James Merrill. Maybe some of you know this, that James Merrill's father was the person who co-started Merrill Lynch. So as one teacher I had said about James Merrill, he was born on third base in some ways. Can you hear me okay? Reasonably well? Excellent. Born on third base, and yet I think, he's someone who, it seems like, took on the whole of English poetry and made himself dexterous in all its forms, at least all that I can think of. But including this poem called The Broken Home, which is a little sonnet sequence of 7 sonnets. And I suppose it reminds us too that, you can come from, great resources, and if your home is a broken one, you can have, the kind of lack that many of us have. I grew up in a single parent household too, so this is a poem that's always moved me. The Broken Home. Crossing the street, I saw the parents and the child at their window, gleaming like fruit, with evening's mild gold leaf. In a room on the floor below, sunless, cooler, a brimming saucer of wax, marbly and dim. I have lit what's left of my life. I have thrown out yesterday's milk and opened a book of maxims. The flame quickens, the word stirs. Tell me, tongue of fire, that you and I are as real, at least, as the people upstairs. My father, who had flown in World War I, might have continued to invest his life in cloud banks well above Wall Street and wife. But the race was run below, and the point was to win. Too late now, I make out in his blue gaze through the smoked glass of being 36, the soul eclipsed by twin black pupils. Sex and business, time was money in those days. Each 13th year, he married. When he died, there were already several chilled wives in sable orbit, rings, cars, permanent waves. We'd felt him warming up for a green bride. He could afford it. He was in his prime at 10, but money was not time. When my parents were younger, this was a popular act. A veiled woman would leap from an electric wine-dark car to the steps of, no matter what, the Senate or the Ritz bar, and bodily at newsreel speed attack, no matter whom, Al Smith or Jose Maria Sert or Clemenceau, veins standing out on her throat as she yelled, "Warmonger pig, give us the vote," and would have to be hauled away in her hobble skirt. What had the man done? Oh, made history. Her business, he had implied, was giving birth, tending the house, mending the socks. Always that same old story. Father Time and Mother Earth, a marriage on the rocks. One afternoon, red, satyr-thighed Michael, the Irish setter, had passionately led the child I was to a shut door. Inside, blinds beat sun from the bed. The green gold room throbbed like a bruise. Under a sheet, clad in taboos, lay whom we sought, her hair undone, outspread, and of a blackness found, if ever now, in old engravings where the acid bit. I must have needed to touch it, or the whiteness. Was she dead? Her eyes flew open, startled, strange and cold. The dog slumped to the floor. She reached for me. I fled. Tonight, they have stepped out onto the gravel. The party is over. It's the fall of 1931. They love each other still. She, Charlie, I can't stand the pace. He, come on, honey. Why, you'll bury us all. A lead soldier guards my windowsill, khaki rifle, uniform and face. Something in me grows heavy, silvery, pliable. How intensely people used to feel. Like metal poured at the close of a proletarian novel, refined and glowing from the crucible. I see those two hearts. I'm afraid. Still, cool here in the graveyard of good and evil. They are even so to be honored and obeyed. Obeyed, at least inversely. Thus, I rarely buy a newspaper or vote. To do so, I have learned, is to invite the tread of a stone guest within my house. Shooting this rusted bolt, though, against him, I trust I am no less time's child than some who on the heath impersonated poor Tom, or on the barricades risk life and limb. Nor do I try to keep a garden, only an avocado and a glass of water, roots pallid, gemmed with air, and later, when the small gilt leaves have grown, fleshy and green, I let them die, yes, yes, and start another. I am Earth's no less. A child, a red dog roams the corridors, still of the broken home. No sound, the brilliant rag runners halt before wide open doors. My old room, its wallpaper, cream, medallioned with pink and brown, brings back the first nightmares, long summer colds, and Emma, sepia-faced, perspiring over broth carried upstairs, a swim with golden fats I could not taste. The real house became a boarding school. Under the ballroom ceiling's allegory, someone at last may actually be allowed to learn something. Or from my window, cool with the unstiflement of the entire story, watch a red setter stretch and sink in cloud.
So much. He was brilliantly educated. From the very beginning, he had a mademoiselle. And he loved puzzles, games, music was immensely important. Music prefaced poetry. And it was always very important. I remember James would be most relaxed taking an afternoon nap. You could always see his fingers tapping out a line or a piece of music. It was quite a great many rare pieces of music by heart. Yeah. In all his places he lived, he had a few houses of Greece, New York, Stonington, and Key West. There was piano. Everybody was invited to play. It was great fun. But when he was seriously working on a poem, it helped him a great deal to explore music again. Goodness, I could just go on and on.
It'd be very
But
interesting.
I wanted to, I was going to go. He had a difficult time when he was a boy being chauffeur. He would kind of duck down. He didn't want to be known as, the presentational aspects of that. And so his father was immensely kindly. And when he said, "Is my son really good?" to a 12 years old to an English teacher, she said, "Oh, yes, he's quite good. Good enough to, if I publish something, would he be pleased?" Oh, sure, Mr. Merrill. That's what Jim's book came about when he was about 14, published by his father. And so that's the approval. As long as you work like hell, you go to work at 8 o'clock and finish at 5. That's how you're going to get good. And James became great. And here we go. This is sort of about out of Texas wishing well. Stranger, look down, the jingle said, and you will see the face of one who loves you true. Will do. My face looked back at me, sheer above a ground of hard, cold cash. Pennies a glint from either eye, silver and hair, teeth, value everywhere. Drop my coin and make my wish. Let me love myself until I die. Goodness, we were going away. Such line endings he has. There's one in the tenancy. So if I'm a host at last, may be a little bit my own past, may others be whole in it. You had one that you liked the books.
I don't know that this is a last line, although you may be able to confirm it. But he spoke of when he wasn't working on the Ouija board poems, that he was basically writing his chronicles of love and loss, as maybe many of us would be doing.
So everybody, that's a great love and loss is all parenthetic. It's like quotation marks. Right? Oh, one of them is a line that you'll hear said, box, eternal boxwood mazes, the owl's umlaut. Here's one that is of our time. The closet fell down around me. So, and here we go. He was a master of lyric, short lyric, as well as amazingly long poems that you've heard. And here, I'm going to read a couple of love poems. A renewal, having used every subterfuge to shake you, lies, fatigue, or even that of passion. Now I see no way but a clean break. I add that I am willing to bear the guilt. Do not assent. Autumn turns windy, huge, a clear vase of dry leaves vibrating on and on. We sit, watching. When I next speak, love buries itself in me up to the hilt. This is really a signature form. He had spent some time in the 1950s in Japan and had many kimonos. And he so much of Japanese culture he adored. And it's a great deal of his work. And this is the kimono. When I returned from Lover's Lane, my hair was white as snow. Joy, incomprehension, pain, I'd seemed like seasons come and go. How I got home again, frozen, half dead, perhaps you know. You hide a smile and quote a text. Desires ungratified persist from one life to the next. Hearts we strip ourselves beside, long, long ago were X'd on blueprints of consuming pride. Time's out of mind. The bubble gleamed to our charred level through April back. 7B. Keep talking while I change into the pattern of the stream, bordered with brushes white on blue.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that.
This is another signature poem that Rick's going to read. Last lines.
I was going to say this was my favorite, one of my favorite last lines. So that's a way of maybe of getting you to kind of hang in there for this poem. It's just a couple pages. One also dedicated to his friend Elizabeth Bishop, wonderful, wonderful poet. This poem is called The Victor Dog, which may make some of us think of that dog on the old RCA label, right? The Victor Dog. Bix to Bucks to Huda to Belay, this little white dog on the Victor label listens long and hard as he is able. It's all in a day's work, whatever plays. From judgment, it would seem he has refrained. He even listens earnestly to block, then builds a church upon our acid rock. These mans know he's the Learman's best friend, or would be if hearing and listening were the same. Does he hear? I fancy he rather smells those lemon gold arpeggios and revels, les jets d'eau du palais d'Azuki Samet. He ponders the Schumann concerto's tall willow hit by lightning and stays put when he surmises through one of Bach's eternal boxwood mazes, the oboe pungent as a bitch in heat, or when the calypso decants its raw bay rum, or the moon in Wozzeck Rydens ripe for murder. He doesn't sneeze or howl, just listens harder. Adamant needles bear down on him from whirling of outer space, too black, too near. But he was taught as a puppy not to flinch, much less to imitate his bête noire Blanche, who barked, fat, foolish creature, at King Lear. Still others fought in the road's filth over Jezebel, slavered on hearts of horned and pelted barons. His forebears lacked, to say the least, forbearance. Can nature change in him? Nothing's impossible. The last chord fades. The night is cold and fine. His master's voice rasps through the groove's bare groves, obediently, in silence like the graves. He sleeps there on the still warm gramophone, only to dream. He is at the premiere of a Handel opera long thought lost, Il Cane Minore. Its allegorical subject is his story, a little dog revolving round a spindle, gives rise to harmonies beyond belief, a cast of stars. Is there in Victor's heart no honey for the vanquished? Art is art. The life it asks of us is a dog's life.
Yeah, thank you. Let me love myself until I die. Rick asked me, did he love himself? Did he love him? I said, whenever he finished a poem, he loved himself. Work was primary in his life. Of course, living love, so forth, love and loss, and living love. But work, lose himself, and for the changing light to end up transcribing all those pages of correspondence with the other world. It's dizzy, the amount of work. Anyway, he was one to revise poems. He was one to work on many poems at the same time. Elizabeth Bishop took, 18 years to write Rousseau in England. James maybe could do it in 3, but it just was the amount of the bookshelf is quite wide, and the quality astounding from an early, amazingly prodigious, and he kept stepping into his genius. And he educated others. He was a born teacher. He just couldn't help it. He did have some instructorship in institutions, but primarily he attracted the Rick young poets, male and female, who he always had wonderful advice and would spend long times with them and read their poems. And there was an amazing mentor. So many people can say that, yes, I was a disciple of James Merrill, and be immensely proud. Sad. So many people. You had quite an experience up there, which we'll talk about in a second. That's true. But I want to read first. Say what was to come is voices from another world, and this is an earlier poem, and the Ouija board really wasn't that interesting at that time. But voices from the other world presently had our touch to keep teacup stirred, then circled lazily about from A to Z. The first voice heard, if they are voices, these mute spellers out, was that of an engineer, originally from Cologne, dead in his 22nd year of cholera in Cairo. He had known no happiness. He once met Goethe, though. Goethe had told him, persevere. Our blind town wild. And with that, a horde of voices gathered above the Ouija board. Some childish, we might say, blurred by sleep. One little boy named Will, reluctant possibly and rough, like a large linen page out of El Greco, pulled back the arras for the next voice, cold and portentous. All is lost. Flee this house. Auto von terror taxes. Obey, you have no choice. Frightened, we stopped. It tossed till sunrise, frightened the rumpled sheets with gold. Each night since then, the moon waxes. Small insects flit around the cold torch we light that sends them pattering to the porch, but no real sign. New voices come, dictate addresses, begging us to write. Some warn of lives misspent, and all of doom in ways that so exhilarate we are sleeping sound of late. Last night the teacup shattered in a rage. Indeed, we have grown nonchalant towards the other world. In the gloom here, our elbows on the clear table, we talk and smoke, pleased to be stirred rather by buzzings of the jasmine, by the drone of our own voices, poor blind rovers wheeze, than by those clamoring overhead, obsessed or piteous. For a commitment, we still have wit to postpone, because once looked at lit by the cold reflection of the dead, risen extinct but irresistible, our lives have never seemed more full, more real, or the full moon more quick to chill. Hey, Rick.
So this is a moment where I have like a little bit of an anecdote. You can imagine here, Peter is the one with so many lived stories. I came really close to meeting James Merrill once, about a year or two before he passed away, at a reading at the 92nd Street Y. It was a tribute to Zbigniew Herbert, the wonderful Polish poet. I remember just seeing all the books laid out and being mesmerized by them. And just, I noticed a presence kind of in front of me. And one of my friends, actually this poet, Mary Jo Bang, came over to me and said, did you see that James Merrill was standing in front of you, like right across the table for like half an hour? I don't know how long it was. And he just was looking at you. And later I told Peter this, and he said, oh, he probably thought you reminded him of this friend of his. You named him, I don't recall the name, but
David McIntosh.
Oh, right. I had to read the biography that came out to actually even know what that meant.
Listen, Whitman said you can't stop the instinct of looking around, and unfortunately he probably was staring. That's okay.
But so that's a sort of smaller story. I mean, that's a sort of story of missed opportunity, probably. If I had looked up, my goodness, I would have met this amazing man. But, cut to almost a decade later, in the fall of 2007, I got a chance to live in his apartment at 107 Water Street. I don't know how many years after his death, he bequeathed his apartment to the city of Stonington, the Village Improvement Association, and they turned it into an artist residency center. At that time, you could stay a whole semester there. So I was there for the whole fall, September to December. And so, on one day, a couple of movers come in and they are taking away the old refrigerator. Mm-hmm. And, there's just this like mound of dust. I mean, it looked really old. And I just sort of went at it with a broom and a dustpan because, well, when you're living at a place, you got to clean up from time to time. But I'm sort of, brushing it into the dustbin, and I'm seeing these words caked into the dirt. And I thought, oh my goodness, this could be a poem here. So I wrote this. The title is From 3 Words of a Magnetic Poetry Set. Oh, by the way, when I told Peter about this, Peter bought the poetry set for him. And in fact, it was an erotic poetry set, a sex set, I think he said. earlier tonight. So anyway, none of that made it into this title, but you know it now. From 3 words of the magnetic poetry set found caked in dirt beneath James Merrill's last refrigerator. And the 3 words are crimson, ring, and touch. It's true, there is no substitute for touch, for the kiss that sets the world in motion. One caress is all it takes. Watch any nurse in a delivery ward. Each warm fingerprint is gift. Whole histories of the heart could be devoted to what passes in an instant, from the snow of old skin tumbling like dazed moths in a blizzard of sunlight, to what turns crimson when the lit red fuse passes from lip to tongue, in a kiss first registered as shock, then recognized, taken in seen, as when your true love says, your lips a kissable music before nodding off, leaving your mouth that inflamed right monogram of O, an unkissed wish, that tremor in your bones restored. The residue of touch, the lipstick crimson rings, a nutrient set to spreading in an instant, or at the promise of the touch to come, a single note struck in the choir of itself, when made to sing in us is madrigal, a resonance of every clear perception of the world, even disappointment, which might otherwise make for a language cacophonous. But when such sound takes residence in us, the resonance instead becomes the love we can do least without, the color of a tapped black note, a surface shaped in pressure, fissure, fault of pigment, ink, a single stroke, hoisted in the rafters of the mind, which is just another way to know the origin of touch as curative. Being a little touch, clearly, is unavoidable, but like a constellation, reflected perfectly, then blurred in a waiting pool, stirred by hand. The silver rings turn crimson in a heart exposed, as if by touch alone, one person, one life might keep the world in motion.
Sir. I know who's smiling.
So now,
Yes.
cue up to. This is the AV portion of things tonight.
Talking about the long book, The Changing Light at Sandover. This is a speech from it. And this is James, I guess it was 1994 at Washington University.
Maybe a year or 2 before he passed away. You can imagine too, when we were designing this, we wanted to bring him here.
Now, 3 brief excerpts from Sandover. The poem, of course, is based on Ouija Board seances with David Jackson. Among our interlocutors are a fallen angel of horrid bat-like appearance, who, through our growing fondness for him, changes into the mannerly peacock Mirabelle. The Archangel Gabriel, the Lord of fire and death, who comes in the last book of the trilogy with his brothers Michael, Raphael, and Emmanuel to beguile and terrify us. And 2 mortal shades, W.H. Auden and our Greek friend Maria, or Maman, as we affectionately called her. To begin with, we'll have a speech, an exchange between Auden and J.M. Next will come the angel Gabriel addressing the schoolroom, followed by a tiny post-mortem by Maria and David Jackson. Finally, DJ and JM say antiphonally the canzone Samos. I'm lucky to have Peter Hooten with me. He was the Gabriel of our Sandover video film, to take over what I couldn't dream of doing on my own. He will enter at the proper moment. Now, Auden. On with the work. Freddie for you, JM. I'm maddening. It's all by someone else. In your voice, or in Mirabelle's, I counted after Ephraim on returning to private life, to my own words. Instead, here I go again, a vehicle in this cosmic carpool. Mirabelle once said, he taps my word banks. I'd be happier if I were tapping them, or thought I would. Your scruples, dear boy, are inconsequent, if I may say so. Can you still be bent after our course in how to see past lone autonomate powers behind the throne, or doing your own thing? Each teeny bit made personal, pardon madame, as shit. Granted that in first childhood we were not praised enough for getting off the pot. It's time to do so now. Think what a minor part the self plays in a work of art, compared to those great givens, the rose brick manor, all topiary forms and metrical mode to ripple, from anthologized perennials to herb garden of cliches, from Latin-labeled fungi to the thorn four-letter Latin-labeled hybrids to the thorn four-letter fungi that enrich the lawn. Is not Arcadia to dwell among greenwood perspectives of the mother tongue, wood system underfoot, while overhead the sun god sang and shades of meaning spread, and far snow-capped abstractions glittered near or fairly melted into atmosphere? As to the family itself, my dear, just gape up with that coroneted frieze, sweet Williams and faint-flavored Emilys, the doubting Thomas and the dulcet one. Hardy, my boy, who else at Campion? Milton and Dryden are Long Johns. In short, in bed of prayers, and music flushed with port, the dull, the prodigal, the mean, the mad. It was the greatest privilege to have had a bare, low ceiling made through at the top. You convinced me. Yet don't stop. I shall, once I have taken up your chief and earliest anxiety. Believe, facts, JM, all you knew to want, wretched, rickety, recalcitrant imps of the anti-mask, rude scenery and guttural stompings when the sovereign nods, soundlessly divide, and there a table is set and lamps lit for the feasting god. Oberon's court, or my friend Plato's cave, appear. The elder facts in livery of fable have joined the dance, for fact is fable. This is our gift from Mirabelle, my dear.
That was so masterly poem. It's a big, thick book, almost thicker than the complete poems. And here he writes this short little lyric called Santo. It's
I'd like to say a few words about the affair, my affair with the library here.
it's called Santo.
From my own point of view.
He labeled Santo.
30 years ago, I received a letter
S-A-T.
from an Eastern university named Withheld, a letter that might as well have been addressed to occupant. Indeed, four
James
other
Merrill
people in my tiny village in Connecticut received the identical letter. It invited me to give my life's drug, my paper.
It's not time for it. Well, anyway, I think let's find it. I'm going to read it.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
There you go. I'll find it. It was a friend of mine in New York City, Alan Moss Raverall, collected Puerto Rican statuary, Santo, And they're smaller. They're very refined. They're either academic or rather naive. And he had a huge collection. And James was immensely impressed. And Alan had told James the story of like, well, when the saint isn't working, we just put him upside down in the toilet and punish him. And then we take him and paint him again and redress him and rename him. So James thought he would, Dundee, here's a poem. And let's see, it's called, of all things, Santo. I wish you, he said it in the voice of a little girl. And that's what you would have seen, his voice of a little girl saying it. In respect to Elizabeth Bishop again, her voice of a little girl. It's, here we go. Let's see, Santo. Can we line up perhaps the last piece called Somos and get that ready?
Are you going to do that
I'm
right
gonna
after
do the
this?
Santo and then you'll line up.
I'll do it.
We're going to do another poem first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse us while we find. So I'm sorry. Oh, James just said it.
It's a very short poem.
Here we go. What would life be without glitches here and there? Santo, Francisco on his shelf, wreathed in dusty wax roses for weeks and weeks, hadn't been himself, making no day come true by answering a prayer. Just dulling, standing there. What did my grandma do? She painted his beard black and rinsed the roses clean, then hid his rags in half a new red satin cloth, renaming him Martin. Next week, the baby spoke. Juan sent a photograph on board his submarine. Aunt Concha went to cook downtown at the hotel. The sick white dog got well, and that was all it took. That led into a play called The Image Maker. I was very fortunate to be able to play a song played it at universities, at the YMHA in New York City. It had a little set. In fact, this is a stool from the set, but it was just wood color. Yes, and you have a.
Yeah, so the next poem, we only have a couple poems left, and then we could certainly have a Q&A, just a conversation. This, I believe, is one of the last poems that James Merrill wrote, called Christmas Tree. It's like a concrete poem, basically. You know, you can kind of look at it and see that it's in the shape of half of a Christmas tree. I remember when it came out in Poetry Magazine, and it was published maybe months after he died, just a few months after he died in February, if I'm remembering correctly. It was published sort of in a center justified way, so you saw the whole Christmas tree. But then Peter had the story as to why it's half of the Christmas tree.
Well, it's a shaped poem as a full Christmas tree, and of that tradition of a shaped poem. And he had a wonderful. He loved Fairfield Porter as a painter. He had a couple of pictures. So he remembered. I put this together. He remembered Fairfield looking at half of a Christmas tree from another room. So it was half. And so this is really what he intended it to look like. Half of the Christmas tree, because half of his life is gone. I mean, you know, it's like one reason after. This is a death poem. He could have written it at 50, he could have written it at 69. He was in touch with these things.
Yeah, it's also one of the few poems that he wrote in character, that is, like as a persona, in the voice of the Christmas tree itself. But, you know, you'll hear it, and, you know, knowing that, you know, I think when this was written, Peter was telling me that they were in Arizona, if I'm not mistaken. And, you know, James was very ill at the time and still able to write a remarkable poem like this. But you'll hear some elements that probably will feel a little bit like the the poet poking through the persona. But writing a persona is so lovely. Like it gives you this distance, and so you maybe get to articulate things you wouldn't otherwise. And there is a Christmas tree that belonged to James Merrill. Christmas tree, to be brought down at last from the cold singing and sighing mountain, where I and the others had been fed, looked after, kept still, meant I knew, of course I knew, that it would only be a matter of weeks, that there was nothing more to do. Warmly, they took me in, made much of me. The point from the start was to keep my spirits up. I could assent to that, for honestly, it did help to be wound in jewels, to send their colors flashing forth from vents in the deep fragrant sables that cloaked me head to foot. Over me then, they wove a spell of shining, purple and silver chains, eavesdropping tinsel, amulets, milagros, miracles, software of silver, a heart, a little girl, a Model T, 2 staring eyes, the angels' trumpets, Bud and Bee, the children's names in clown-like capitals. Somewhere a music box whose tiny song played and replayed, I ended before them by loving. And in shadow behind me, a primitive ivy to keep the show going. Yes, what lay ahead was clear. The stripping, the cold street, my chemicals, plowed back into the earth for lives to come. No doubt a blessing, a harvest, but one that doesn't bear now or ever dwelling upon. To have grown so thin, needles and bone, the little boy's hands beating about my spine. The mother's voice, holding up wonderfully, she says, no dread, no bitterness, the end, beginning. Today's dusk room aglow for the last time with candlelight. Faces love-lit, gifts underfoot, still to be so poised, so receptive, still to recall, to praise. Before we continue, I do want to thank people that seem to be on the edges of the scene, but are in fact like very much part of the scene. Georgia, where would we be without Georgia? And Vincent, I guess, also known as Saint Vincent, and Roxanne, and Katya, James, who did so much to set things up. I don't even think he's here now. And of course, is he downstairs? Thank you, James, if you're listening. Nice. And of course to Elsie and Tony, and to all of you, frankly, because you make all of this possible, and bring up things in us we didn't even know we had until they come out. So thank you.
And George, especially for your graciousness and having James' birthday party.
Yeah.
It's James' 96th and my 7-month anniversary with my new sweetheart. So we count in months at the stage. 7 months. It's pretty good.
This is Samos.
Yes, on Soma, which is a canzone, a traditional confidence.
We have a sense of sunrise.
And this is Peter.
Golden oil poured upon water, soothing its
The sleeper sense of inborn amniotic homing sense was fairer in him. Now the dream fire, in which it has been felt each human sense burns, now through ship's radar's cool sixth sense, or mere unerring starlight, to an island. Here we were, the twins of sea and land, up and about for hours, hues, cries, sense, had placed at eye level a single light or song. The harbor glazed with warm pink light.
Far wisps were weaving string bag of light.
Full sea stones. Their astounding color sense, porphyry, alabaster, chrysolite translucences that go dead in daylight, asked only the quick dip in holy water for the saint of cell on cell to come alight. Illuminating crystals, thinking light, refracting it, the gray prismatic fire or yellow-gray of sea's dilute sapphire. Wavelengths daily deeply score the light motifs of loom and wheel upon this land. To those who listen, it's the promised land.
A little spin today. Dirt roads inland, dance and revolve in a nerve-jangling light, doing the ancient dances of the land where gnarled was olive trees that shagged the land with silver. Old men, their two-bladed sense of spendthrift poverty, the very land being, if not loath, tomb, superbly land, upright on the downbeat. We who water the local wine, which drinks itself like water, clap for more. Cry out to be this island, licked all over by white salt fire, bee noons pulsing ember raked by fire. Know nothing now but her, air, water, fire. For once on the frying pan, and land within their timeless everlasting fire. Blood's least red monocle, oh magnifier of the great eye that sees by its own light more pictures in the world's enchanted fire than come and go in any shrewd crossfire upon the page, syllable and sense. We want unwilled excursions and ascents, crave the upward rippling rungs fire, the outward rippling rings enough of water. Now some details. How else will this hold water? Our rooms 3 flights above the whitewashed waterfront where Pythagoras was born. The fire escape of sky blue iron leads down to water. Yachts creak on mirror berths, and over water voices from Sweden or Somaliland tell how this or that one crossed the water to Ephesus, came back with toilet water and a 2-kilo box of Turkish delight. Trifles. Yet they shine with such pure light in memory, even they, that the eyes water. As with the setting sun, or innocence, do things that fade especially make sense? Solace, we keep trying to make sense of what we can, not souls of the first water, although we've put on airs and taken fire. We shall be dust of quite another land before the seeds here planted come to light.
Everything, oh, great.
Peter, are you taking questions?
You know, this is very, very immensely meaningful. This is immensely meaningful for me to have this celebration. I just received a poem from, well, Rick, but a friend sent me an email today. He just finished a poem celebrating today as well. So it's a lovely thing. Earlier, you were talking about the James Merrill house. He had given it on his death in his will to the village improvement, knowing full well that it was going to be some sort of retreat. And he made sure that all of his homes were shipshape. That was the way he was always. And so they just took it over and have done wonderfully with it. There's a City Lynch has been on the original board and still is on the board. A wonderful scholar, professor, Willard Spiegelman, is living in Stonington on the board. The family is on the board as well and have really given money. So it's going to be here for a long time. And it's the James Merrill House in Stonington, Connecticut. And you can apply for residency there.
That's right, poets and fiction writers.
Poets and fiction writers. And there's a
Creative
board,
nonfiction writers.
It's all very professional. It's a beautiful location.
It's certainly a dream to live there, and so many of the books were still there. I think somehow he ended up with Auden's OED, but apparently someone, I think JD McClatchy actually had that one and had given up, many volumes of the OED. So it was a house that was just waiting for people to come take advantage of it. Really a magical place. The sunsets there were like nothing else to really.
And they maintained it as it was. Beautiful.
Peter, I wanted to ask you, I mean, there's so many things I want to ask you, but one question that comes to mind now is like, are there certain things about James that you could tell us that maybe we wouldn't know from any other source that you can repeat in polite company?
Oh, endless. I don't know, that's a broad question.
Yeah, it's kind of
Anecdotal. I'll just, that's one we'd have to think about. Sorry, another question.
well, yes, please.
This is more by way of being conversational than a question.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
We're long-term part-time residents down in Connecticut. And extremely familiar with the Merrill House, the SVIA and City Lynch.
Oh, good.
And it's delightful to be here for the celebration. When you
Oh, I'm
mentioned,
thrilled.
Sandy McClatchy, he's an old dear friend. In fact, Sandy McClatchy taught me freshman English at Yale.
Oh my God, you love
And then I maintained the relationship with him and with his partnership kid,
Yes.
really largely through Stonington. And there are probably other people that we knew jointly there, like Eleanor Peretti, the
Yes.
Baroness who that wrote Green Thoughts.
Absolutely.
So we're delighted to be here. That isn't really a question. It's more just conversational. But we're delighted to be here.
Tons of things flashing back. Just names you can remember, and how the barber shop is the village barber shop.
That's right.
And I don't know whether you've ever read James laments the fact that there are so many malls, and the fact that the little town of Stonington has died. It's lost its grocery store. It's lost its dry cleaner.
Well, he wrote a poem about that.
November,
about
oh.
Roland's Market.
November.
And it was very controversial at the time about that transferring the market from the father to the son,
Yes.
and how things had declined and how this was sort of
Well,
symbolic of the
crack
decline
at
of
it.
the village.
Somebody comes along, it's the son inherits it, and goes through it, it's classic. And he wrote about it fairly honestly, and then the family threatened to sue. So it was taken out and collected everything, but has been republished in unpublished poems. November, it's wonderful. Oh, of the amount of work, as you know, and astoundingly, I just keep saying he steps into his genius more and more. His musical background had so much to do about it. Not necessarily, I mean, this word IQ is huge, but his verbal IQ is huge. But the musical aspect, I think, is coming to light more and more, and it infuses everything. Some pieces you can almost without the composer. I could go on and on. So you can ask me that question again. Now you got me going.
I'll ask you that question.
Yeah. Well, we go through it so they
There.
can lead into each other.
Yeah.
Just he was up until this is his birthday, and he always chose to live. I mean, he didn't want anybody's. He didn't talk about his illnesses. Stop one and say, "Oh, I got the flu." He might have with Sandy because they were immensely intimate. Next door neighbors, and Sandy was one of the. He and Stephen Getson and Judith Moffat perhaps were supreme disciples. They had good students and such, and learned so much. Sandy always used to worry about his voice being too much like J.M.'s or James's because the impression was such, the impact was such of this man's genius. Couldn't help it. He rubbed off on it. I just so many years have passed, and it's just so fresh. And Helen, his mother, asked me one time, she was frustrated. She said, "Peter, do you dream?" "I don't dream of him. I want to dream of him." And I dream of him all the time still. And he appears so handsome. There's just in the height of his life. So he's up in the pantheon. I'm sure playing all sorts of word games. Many fun. So he would go through this very quickly. He was such a word master. He could do a crossword bridge. So he had all. He was very amazing. I like it. Oh, he's a cook. So there's a recipe of his. He fancied he could cook creatively, so he was asked for a recipe, and he said, "Well, take a grater and take a fresh, good tomato, and just grate it, and then put it in the freezer, and it will ice. So you've got iced tomato soup." A little dollop of sour cream. It's like, maybe a little sprinkle about it. But a ginger beef was a recipe. He taught me to cook. And ginger beef was one of the recipes. And I'm very thankful. His mother was a great cook. It's so much of his parents are, you talk about the legacy of our forebears. It was huge in his life. Early poems, the titles of early poems repeat themselves later. It seems like there's just underwater titles. There's a terrific interview on YouTube with Samuel.
Yes. Yeah,
And there's a film that we possibly on Helen Bedford is a very nice one too.
Yes.
It's one thing changing my Samuel, the voices from Samuel. But I think everybody's getting an answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming.